tutorial on how to finish off your seams on your projects in your garments or your bags and your purses without using a serger. Most of these techniques, actually all of these techniques, will have the seam fully enclosed. There will be no raw edges on the inside of your project once you are completed, and quite a few of these seams are seams that are used on the higher end of the fashion industry. Okay, let's get started. I would like to say, first of all, please try to excuse the noise in the background. The lawn guys are outside manicuring the lawn, and it's pretty loud, but I'm going to try to go ahead and film anyway. And the first hem we're going to do is called the French seam, and we're going to use these two pieces of fabric. This is the front, this is the back. I know you really can't tell too much, but this is the back side and this is the front of the fabric. And the way you do a French seam is you take the two wrong sides together. So the pretty side will be facing up, and you're going to make a 1/4 inch seam. Your presser foot is about 1/4 inch wide. So if you go ahead and line up with the edge of the presser foot, you will have a 1/4 inch seam. Now we're going to do a straight seam for 1/4 inch. And then after we do that, we trim this down to an 1/8 inch. So we're going to trim it down to about an 1/8 inch. And then after you do this, normally what you would do is you would open this up, turn it to where the right sides are together, and you would iron this down. But I'm going to go ahead and just finger press it, but when you do it, you iron it down to make the seam look nice and neat. And then you line up the edge of this seam with the presser foot again, and you make another 1/4 inch seam. And now your French seam is complete. You have your seams completely enclosed into the fabric. This is the wrong side with the seam, and this is the right side. Now you could choose to leave this like this, or you could choose to go ahead and sew that down, what I really like to do. See, it's getting loud in here. What I really like to do is to sew down the hem, but you don't have, the seam, but you don't have to if you don't want to. But that's my personal preference, is to just sew it down. Now everything lies flat, and this is the right side, and that's where the seam is. Actually, you probably can't see it too well. And this is the wrong side. Now let me zoom the camera in some more. Sorry, one moment. This is the right side, and this is the wrong side. Now if you notice that the seam, there are no raw edges, the seam lays completely flat, and this is actually how you would finish the seams on a man or a woman's button-down dress shirt. So if you're in the market of wanting to learn how to sew a dress shirt, the French seam would be one of the seams you want to practice and master before you dive into that. And actually it's pretty easy. It's just like I just showed you. Okay, let's move on to the next one. One moment. Okay, the next seam we're going to do to enclose the raw edge is called a flat felt seam. And what we're going to do, this is the right side of the fabric and this is the wrong side. We're going to put right sides together like we would normally do when we sew. And I'm working with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. There's a line right here on my sewing machine that marks the 5/8 of an inch. So that's what I'm going to line up the side of my fabric with, that line. And I'm going to go ahead and sew that. I'm going to make sure that I keep my fabric lined up with the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance line on the throat plate. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is what we call grading the seam. And that basically means cutting one seam down to a quarter of an inch. Or you can do an eighth of an inch. And now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to iron this out flat. I'm going to finger press it right now. And then I'm going to take the seam, part of the seam allowance I did not cut, going to fold it on top of the cut seam. Let me zoom in some so you can see what I'm doing better. Okay, this is the side of the seam that I cut, that I graded down to about quarter of an inch, maybe eighth of an inch, and this is the one that's still at 5/8 of an inch. What I'm going to do is, let's say we iron this down flat, and I'm going to fold this one on top of the cut edge, and then fold it again. So now all the raw edges are enclosed, and you would iron this down before you sew. I'm going to do a finger press, but when you do this in real life, iron this down to make it lay nice and flat. And now I'm going to sew that down. A lot of jeans are made this way with flat felt seams. So if you're in the market of making jeans or pants or anything like that, and also the sleeves of dress shirts, they're also made like this to enclose the seam. So if you're in the market of learning how to make any of those things, this flat felt seam is something you want to know how to learn how to do. I'm going to go ahead and sew that down. These are good seams to learn how to do because when you go into the higher end clothes, you don't find serge edges on your clothes. You find these kind of enclosed seams right here on the higher end. So if you are in the market of wanting to learn how to make high fashion clothing, this is something you need to learn how to do. And this is also the way you would finish the seams on the inside of a dress shirt, on the sleeve, and on the inside of some pant legs. And I'm going to zoom in some more. This is the wrong side of the, hold on one second, I'm not in the, this is the wrong side, if we can get a focus here, of the fabric, and this is the right side of the fabric. So notice that the seams are completely enclosed, and they're almost the same as the French seam. And I'll talk to you about the differences of why we would use one over the other at the end of the video. Let's go to the next one. Okay, this next seam is called the welt seam. And once again, this is the right side of the fabric. And I'm going to put the right sides together. And I'm going to line up with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I'm going to sew that. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to once again grade the seam. We're going to cut one side of the seam down to either a 1/2 inch. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and do a 1/4 of an inch. Now, once you do that, if you have a serger, you're going to want to serge the uncut edge right here, the side of the seam you did not grade down. And if you do not have a serger, what you want to do is you want to either zigzag stitch the side here, or you want to use your overcasting foot if you have an overcasting foot and overcast the edge here that you did not grade down. Let me change over to my overcasting foot and I'll be back. Okay, I'm back, and when you use your overcasting foot, I'm going to line this edge up to the edge of the fabric up to here, and I'm going to go ahead and overcast that. Now, if you don't have an overcasting foot, it's perfectly okay to zigzag this edge right here. The edge you did not cut down is what we're going to be sewing on, not the edge we cut down. If you don't have an overcasting foot, I highly recommend it because it finishes off the seams just like it would if you were, well, not like you were doing a serge seam. Let's see if we can come back into focus. Let me see, one. There we go. This is what the edge looks like on the overcasting foot. Almost like a serger, but not quite. Now, next thing we're going to do is we're going to open this up. You want to iron this over to the edge, over the edge that you cut, like this. And then we're going to sew that down. Let me go ahead and change feet back to the zigzag foot, or some places it's called the J foot. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and sew this seam down on top of the seam that we cut and close it in like that. So this is another option that you would like to use. You can use this on thin fabrics or any kind of fabric. If you don't want to do the French seam or the fail seam on a regular garment that is not a dress shirt, you can enclose our pair of jeans. You can enclose them. Actually, some jeans do have a welt seam. So that is the welt seam. Let me zigzag in. I'm sorry, not zigzag in. Let me zoom in so you guys can see what it looks like. This is the front of the fabric, the top side, and this is the wrong side right here. I think the light from my sewing machine is making it look a little blue, but see if we can zoom out some to get it to focus. Sorry about the, there we go. This is the right side of the fabric, and this is the wrong side. Notice that the seam is completely enclosed. Okay, this is the welt seam. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next seam. One moment. Okay, this next seam is called a plain seam with a clean edge finish. Let me zoom out some more. One moment. Okay, once again, this is the right side of the fabric. We're going to sew with the right sides together. A 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm going to go ahead and line that up with my machine, with the marking on my machine like I've been doing. You know, normally when we sew, we're supposed to take 3 stitches forward and 3 stitches backwards and then sew in order to lock the seam. I haven't been doing that on this tutorial, but that is what you would normally do when you're sewing. So let's go ahead and do a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm keeping my fabric lined up with the 5/8 of an inch mark on my sewing machine plate. And the way you would finish this seam is actually you are going to press this open. So you're going to take your iron and press that open. I'm going to do a finger press. And then you fold the hem under. Hold on one second. You fold the hem under one time and you top stitch it. And that is how you're going to go ahead and, if you were doing this in real life, you would go ahead and iron this down before you sew it down and give it a nice neat look. But for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and just sew on top of it like this. But in real life, you're going to iron this down. And I'm going to put this really slow so I can get that sewed properly, because I didn't iron it down like I was supposed to. I'm going to go ahead and put this on slow so I can fold this down as I go, because I didn't iron it down like I was supposed to. But you're supposed to iron this down so it can stay while you're sewing and to give it a neater appearance. So this is one of those tricks. Well, not really a trick. This is one of the finishes that we use in the higher end sewing to enclose the seams. Because if you look at some of your higher end clothing and the way that custom made clothes are made, you have your seams enclosed. That is one of the reasons why people pay more money for these types of garments, is because of the extra effort that goes into making it, as opposed to just doing a serged hem. Serged hems sergers do come in handy when you're working with knits and when you're making ready to wear, but when you're doing custom clothing, my seams are all the way looking bad. They're not straight at all, because I did not iron the hems down before I did it like I should have. But like I was saying, when you're making custom clothing, one of the reasons why we charge more money is because we do go the extra and do stuff like this, closing in all of the seams as opposed to just serging it down like you would find in a ready-to-wear garment. So take these things into consideration, because when you find a client that buys only custom clothes, this is the type of quality they're looking for. And we did the one side, and let's see if we can make the other side a little bit neater, seeing as because the first side looks horrendous because I did not iron down the hem before I did it, but I should have. Let's see if we can get it working properly this time. The second time looks a lot better. Okay, this is the wrong side. This is the right side. Let me go ahead and zoom in some and see if I can get out of that blue light of the sewing machine. Okay, this is the right side of the fabric. You can see how I have this wavy line here because I didn't press the fabric down. You want to press those seams down just like before. And you can do it when you're pressing your seams open. You can go ahead and turn it under and press it at the same time, and you won't have this effect. It would look nice and neat. And this is the wrong side of the fabric. And once again, all of the seams are enclosed. This is called a plain seam with a clean edge finish. Okay, let me go ahead and go to show you the next seam. Okay, we're going to go on to the next seam, which is our next to last seam that we're going to do. Actually, this will be the last seam that I'm going to do. I'll just tell you how to do the other. Once again, this is the right side of the fabric. I'm going to turn it with the right sides together, and this is called a Hong Kong finish. If you are a quilter, this will look extremely familiar to you. It's just like binding a quilt. So once again, I'm going to use a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on this tutorial. I personally like to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but for the tutorial's purposes, I'm going to go ahead and use a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Actually, I moved my needle into the position for the 1/2 inch seam allowance, so this, out of habit, because that's what I normally use. So this is actually a 1/2 inch seam allowance that we're looking at right now. And just like binding a quilt, what you would do is you take your binding, and this is the right side of the fabric. This is the wrong side of the fabric. I'm going to line up the edge of the wrong side of the fabric with the edge of the seam. And actually, let me do it like this. Just like binding a quilt. And now I'm going to sew a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on here. No, I'm going to go ahead and do a 1/2 inch seam allowance on here. So I'm going to sew that on just like binding a quilt. And okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this. Hold on 1 second, guys. I'm going to zoom out some. Okay, I'm going to fold this over to where the binding is on this side, the seam is on this side. You would iron that down. You're going to take the edge of the seam, the binding, and match it to the top of the seam, just like I just did. Hold on 1 second so you guys can see. Take the edge of the binding, put it to the top of the seam, and then you fold the binding over on top. Now everything is enclosed, and you're going to sew as close to the edge as possible on top of that binding, just like you would when you're binding a quilt. A lot of the techniques that are used in quilting can be used in sewing garments and bags and purses and things like that. Most people who sew quilts know this, but if you don't sew a quilt, you probably don't know this. Okay, all I'm doing now is I'm trimming off the strings. Gonna open it up. Now, your choices are to A, see your seam is completely enclosed in that. There's no raw edges. Your choices are A, to leave this like this, or you can iron it down to one side and sew on top of this. You find a lot of bags have the inside of the seams finished with a Hong Kong finish. I have no idea why it's called that, and I just know that's what the proper term is. Basically, all you're doing is binding your seams enclosed. You just sewing your seams enclosed into a binding, and you can either leave it as it is or you can sew it down. Depending on what I'm making, I do either or. If I'm making bags, I may go ahead and sew the binding down, or I may leave it up. You never know. So this is the wrong side with the binding sewed down, and this is the right side of the seam. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and come back to you and talk about when we would use different types of enclosed seams on the project. One moment. Okay, I'm back. Now this is the French seam, and this is the flat felled seam. I said I was going to talk to you guys, let you know when to use a difference. When you use a French seam, you can use this on the side seams of dress shirts and things like that, button down dress shirts, but it's extremely difficult to do that when you're trying to enclose a seam on a sleeve. So using the flat felled seam would be a better choice when you're trying to go ahead and enclose the seam on a sleeve. You will find these on sleeves of dress shirts, on insides of pant legs, and you will also find this one, the French seam, on the inside of pants legs, and also on the seams of a shirt. And actually, as you can see side by side, I cut them down so you can see them side by side, and you really cannot tell the difference too much. This is the inside, and this is what the outside, the pretty side, would look like if you saw it in real life. Now let's talk about the this seam right here. This is the welt seam. As you can see, we have the overcasting right here, and this is the seam. This is the inside, and this is another way to enclose your seams. If you're making ready to wear, but you want to make ready to wear on the higher end, this would be the way to go. You would either serge the end and close it over like I showed you, as opposed to, this is the difference between something you would find at the higher end of ready to wear as opposed to something you would find at Target or Walmart. So this is what you would want to go with if you're trying to make your garments look like the higher end ready to wear. This is the outside, and this is the inside, completely enclosed. This right here is called, the one that I botched really bad because I did not iron like I was supposed to. This is the inside of the plain seam with the neat finish, the one that I supposed to have ironed open and fold under. This is what seamstresses do on their clothes did on their clothes before sergers and zigzag stitch was invented. And this is exactly what seamstresses they've been doing. This has been done for hundreds of years. The most basic thing you could do, but this is still a really valid seam to use when you're closing in your edges. And also this is what you would find on on the higher end ready to wear as well, but also when you're doing a custom order, you can do the seams like this. This is what people are looking for. This is the outside, the inside, and this is the outside. When you do it, you're gonna iron your seams down. It's gonna look really neat. And also the one I said I was gonna tell you about that I didn't show you. This is, I don't know if you can see that on the white, but let me put my hand under there so you can see it. Actually, let's do this. One moment. I have some dark fabric on my table. You can put the seam, you're going to sew the seam as usual with the 5/8 of an inch, and you're going to zigzag the two seams together, and you can leave it like that, or you can serge the seams together, or you can overcast the seams together. You can leave it like that, and that also closes the seam. But this is what you would find on regular ready to wear. This is the inside, this is the outside, and it looks pretty decent. This is what you would find on regular ready to wear, something that maybe you want to try to compete with Walmart or Target when you're selling your clothing. And that's what that is. And this is the last one I did with the Hong Kong finish. This is the, let me go back to the white background. This is the right side of the fabric. This is the inside of the fabric. I took the option of, once I bound the seams together, to sew this down, but you really don't have to if you don't want to. On the inside of my son's backpack, I will put a picture up right here. That was a picture of a same thing of the Hong Kong finish, but I did not sew down the sides. So now I'm gonna go ahead and turn the camera around, talk to you guys about a few things, and then I'll see you guys later. Okay, so like I was telling you before, these are some of the seams that you would find in the higher end of the fashion industry. You do not have to have a serger. It is convenient to have a serger. And if you are making clothing to where you're making basic ready to wear, where you would compete with places like Walmart, Target, JCPenney, you could use a serger and it will go along faster, and it's perfectly okay. However, if you're going to try to go into the custom clothing market or higher end fashion, these are the seams that you're going to want to use, because when you get to the higher end fashions and when you get into custom clothing, the reason why the customer pays more money, people think it's for the label, but really it's not for the label. The reason why the customer pays more money is because of the higher quality fabrics and higher quality sewing techniques. When you use these seam finishing techniques, these qualify as the higher quality sewing techniques. So if you are going to be selling your garments, I would advise that you practice these and then try them out on your garments or on your purses and things like that, because this is also the difference. These seams can also be the difference between your clothes looking handmade and homemade, and you don't want your clothes and your garments to look like an arts and crafts homemade project. You want them to look like someone took time into making them, and they want them to look handmade, higher end, classic. So with that being said, I guess I'll see you guys next time, and as usual, happy sewing.